I don't know the general consensus on how excited people were for The Last of Us Part 2. I think overall, we were just gassed up and to finally see the continuation of Joel and Ellie's incredible story. However, from my own experience, I can tell you that no one wanted the second game to be good more than I did. I endlessly hoped that the leaks were false and that they missed context, etc. I didn't know how disappointed I would be. When it comes to The Last of Us Part 2, I'm going to outline the positives so that I can then move into my critical analysis. First off, The Last of Us Part 1 is my favorite game of all time. I have played and beaten the game on nearly every difficulty, I have spent lots of time in its multiplayer, and I especially invested time in the Left Behind DLC. I have seen numerous Let's Plays ranging from the big three, that being PewDiePie, Jacksepticeye, and Markiplier. I have seen the Teens React playthrough, numerous speedruns of the game, and I have tried to see every cutscene as many times as I could. I love this series. One of my favorite aspects of The Last of Us Part 2 is its graphics. I don't know what other people think, but even right now, I can confirm that the Part 2 has the greatest graphics of any game on the market, bar none. The game's gameplay has also made an overall improvement, whether it be upgrading weapons, or the interactiveness of fist fighting due to the additions of things like dodging, things like going prone or crafting silencers, different kinds of arrows, the addition of dogs, and even the new gun types. Things like the new infected type, the Shambler, were even great additions to the story. For me, the only issue I have with the game comes in its story. I think there are three major aspects which seriously separate the first game and its overwhelming success versus the second game and its absolute failures. Part 1. Story complexity. The Last of Us Part 1, as stated by Angry Joe, is at its very core a very simple story, but what makes the game so engrossing is the fact that the characters and the way that they interact with one another is so believable and complicated that you just can't help but get wrapped up in this game's narrative.
And while this admittedly doesn't sound like a unique story, it's not really, and it doesn't even take many unexpected twists or turns, it just manages to tell it in such an engrossing, believable way that we become fully immersed and invested in what's happening.
However, when you look at The Last of Us Part 2, you see the complete opposite. The story has been overcomplicated to a point that it feels like there is something new. Nearly every new chapter in the game, every new moment is introducing something new. Have I said new enough? This wouldn't be so bad if the characters could keep up. However, nearly every character in the game, besides Tommy, and I'll explain that in a moment, feels like they are all one-noted. Abby is depressed and angry all of the time. She never changes. Ellie is sad and angry all of the time. She never changes. She even starts out completely different than she is in the first game. Joel, well, we'll talk about Joel in a different point. Tommy is the only character in the story that has a noticeable character change in the narrative. However, it only comes out of plot convenience when he goes back to convince Ellie to try to go after Abby again. It comes from out of nowhere and seriously ends up making him seem like an asshole for no reason. He is just outright rude to his surrogate niece for no reason, no setup. I think that's one major reason The Last of Us Part 2 is a failure. It is trying to recreate the magic of the first game, but doesn't stay faithful to its source material. There is one moment in the game that honestly is perfect. We all know that the moment in the museum of Joel and Ellie, the flashback segment, is amazing. It perfectly narrows down a narrative of Joel and Ellie just having a good time for her birthday. Very simple story, but their interactions make the situation more complicated, like when Ellie sees the firefly symbol and just Joel brushes it off. That small moment at the end of the cutscene gives so much depth to the moment, truthfully complicating the situation far more than just giving us new plot every moment there is a chance. Part 2. Moral Ambiguity. The ending of The Last of Us Part 1 is timeless, whereas The Last of Us Part 2's ending is completely wrong. And it all has to do with moral ambiguity. One of the things that makes Joel's decision to save Ellie at the end of the first game so compelling is the moral ambiguity of his choice. Legitimately, people still continue to argue on whether or not him saving Ellie was the right choice. There is ambiguity in the decision. There is no right or wrong answer. Either way, Joel was making a terrible decision. Were he to leave her, Ellie would have been killed. However, by keeping her alive, the ambiguity can stay. You can keep asking the question, did he make the right choice? But were he to let her die, all of it goes out the window. You can't keep asking that question because it doesn't matter. There is no more Ellie. Funnily enough, The Last of Us Part 2 tries so damn hard to make you think there's moral ambiguity in its ending, but there really isn't any. It does the opposite of what Joel chooses, and yet still doesn't manage to be morally ambiguous. At the end, when Ellie is choking Abby, at this point in the game, we have now learned both characters' perspectives, learned their struggles compelling or not, and it has all come to a head in its final moment. And since Ellie is the player's character, we're seeing it from her perspective. The game forces Ellie to make a decision, but rather than making a moral or ethical question out of it, the game sucks all debate from the imagination of the player and forces us to watch as Ellie just lets Abby go. It is sad, unrealistic, and just doesn't mean anything. Ellie has spent the entire game tracking her down, and she suddenly can't kill her? Give me a break! However, were Ellie to kill Abby in that moment, you'd be able to think to yourself, just as you could with Joel, did Ellie make the right choice? Killing Abby makes for a more integral, believable, and compelling story, and then letting her live. Ending the cycle doesn't teach the lesson. Failing to end the cycle and then going home to regret it does, which is exactly what Ellie does. She returns home and sits and can't even play the guitar. Part 3, Joel's death. Finally, let's talk about Joel. Should he have died? Short answer, yes. Long answer, it's complicated. Joel's death, at least in my understanding, gets a bad rap. It's a beautiful scene of surrealism. When I watched it happen, I literally turned to my brother and said, "Oh my god, is this actually happening?" The point is, however, that his death was not done correctly. I'd say at the end of the argument, Joel's death should have served for a grander purpose to the narrative. So rather than saying, he just shouldn't have died, like many people have argued, I'm going to argue that yes, he should have been killed off. However, I think there's a right and wrong way to use his death for the narrative, and The Last of Us Part 2 used it wrong. Like I stated, Joel's death was used wrong. Well, what do I mean by that? Joel's death is the inciting incident of the story. It is what begins to move the plot and the characters forward, ramping up the energy and having new worlds collide with the old. Without looking below the surface, you might just hear someone argue that Abby killed Joel for a good reason. Now, even though that requires hindsight, you could justifiably say that. But why doesn't it work? Why does it not feel justified anyways? Well, using the same gift of hindsight, we the audience can look back and understand that Abby's entire motivation in the game relates to her want to avenge her father's death. Now, let me make this clear. I think that the fact that Abby's father is the doctor is a genius idea. Having new characters be related through opposing ideas makes for more interesting dynamics, so I love that Abby is related to the doctor that Joel kills. It makes for incredibly believable and intriguing motivation. However, this is where the issues begin. If Abby's primary character motive of the story is to kill Joel, and she does it in the first quarter of the game, then for the rest of the next 3 quarters, she will not appear to be motivated. In the second half of the game, when the perspective switches from Ellie to Abby, we see a dramatic shift in storytelling. We begin to see a switch back and forth between Abby before she went to Jackson to kill Joel and Abby after Jackson. The events that transpire before basically have nothing to do with her want to kill Joel. And while she rarely brings it up, if at all, it is clear that Abby's motivation is unrelated to killing Joel. However, because her actions in the inciting incident have almost no buildup, and since we never actually see her specifically find out about Joel's location, this means everything that she does before she kills Joel doesn't have any motivation that properly is attached to the narrative. Everything after she kills Joel has everything to do with retracing the steps of Ellie's narrative. It makes sense that we play as Abby, get saved by Joel, Joel gets attacked, and then we switch to Ellie for his death, and continue playing for her from that point forward because a new motivation has been created in killing Joel. Ellie wants revenge and must hunt down Abby, so naturally, when we play as Ellie, there's an enormous amount of tension that is built up for the eventual confrontation. However, during the Abby sections, it basically requires guesswork to understand what she's doing, why she's doing it. All the while, the game uses every trick in the book to try to convince the audience to like her. Joel killed her dad. Feel bad. You see all her friends? Remember killing them as Ellie? Feel bad. Look, she pet a doggy. Feel bad for her now. That kind of writing is uninteresting, not progressive to the story, and most importantly is the definition of forced. The game does this time and time again, where rather than writing a complex character and showing us that they are dealing with something, the game does a lot of explaino, otherwise known as show, don't tell. Rather than show us that Abby is struggling with her path, the game tells us to feel bad for her. The same goes for Ellie later on in the game. It makes more sense to have Joel's death be pushed back in the story so that we get more time to build up the eventual confrontation. That, to me, is the primary issue with Joel's death because of a lack of motivation or build-up. The moment, while beautifully directed, falls flat in regards to its effect on the story. Another example is the revelation that Ellie comes to Joel's lie. I don't understand how Neil Druckmann managed to fuck up a plot thread so badly, but he managed to take the most important thing from the first game and make it the least important thing in the second by glossing over it. We never get build up to Ellie's eventual discovery of the lie and the confrontation that Joel and Ellie might have, because in the game that we got, Ellie has already snuck out and found out for herself in a flashback. All the tension or build up in the story has already happened, meaning all of it will be unaffected to the audience discovery of the fact. The audience is always finding out new information about the characters, making it feel like we are always 1 to 5 steps behind the actual pace. It makes for a very unrelatable story, which has clearly proven itself to the fans. Hi, thank you guys so much for watching. Do you like this new style of video? If you did, please make sure to hit the like button, subscribe with the bell notifications on. It helps out the channel and really shows me what I need to do for you. Also, take a moment to look me up on any and all music platforms. I have 2 albums out, and I love producing music. So if you love listening to music, what are you waiting for? Here's a small snippet of one of my songs.
We might just bend and break the rules, and you make it look so easy in my head. Now I'm wondering if it will end. It repeats endlessly in my mind.
Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.